Hi guys, my name is Septon Kutchins, and I'd like to talk to you about something today that interests me, and I hope it interests you too. Now, first, let me ask you a question. What did you have for dinner last night? Did you eat at a restaurant? Well, if you ate at a restaurant, I'm sure you've done it before, and you know how modern restaurants work. But a long time ago, we didn't have restaurants like we have them today. In fact, they were very different, and didn't even exist at a certain time, like back in ancient Roman times. Back in ancient Roman times, there wasn't restaurants like we have them today. In fact, it took many steps and many centuries of progression to form the modern restaurant that we had today that was born in France. Now, let's take a look at these steps that it took to make the modern restaurant. This all started back in ancient Rome when there were no restaurants, but there were things that did serve people like street vendors. Now, street vendors were people that were on, the streets and in the markets that served food to the common people. And then there was another food service option called public cooks. Now, public cooks served food to royalty, like the Caesars back in ancient Rome, served them to the Senate, and served food for any person with wealth that was having a party or anything like that. These were kind of like our caterers that we have today. And then, because of the necessity, food service moved indoors. In the Middle Ages, throughout Europe and Asia and places like that, taverns started to show up. Now, these taverns were a necessity because at that time there was a lot of people traveling, and these people needed a warm place to stay and a warm meal to eat after they got done traveling for a day or two or more. Now, even though they got a warm meal, these meals were usually things like soups or cruel dishes of meat and potatoes, things like that, things that they served to everybody, just one dish. There were no menus as we know it today. Now, this is because the restaurant hasn't been invented yet. Let's talk about where the word restaurant comes from. Now, in France, there were shops that served meat-based soups to the common people, very cheap, very easy to make, and these soups were said to restore a person's strength. Now, the French word for restore is restaurer, and after a short time, these shops that served these soups became known as restaurants because the soups became known as restaurants. A take on the word restore, and this is where we get our word restaurant from. And then the French revolted. With the French Revolution, modern food service industry was launched. Things like laws on food service were completely lax because of the lack of government, and the middle class could afford things that they couldn't afford before, like going out to eat at a restaurant. Well, that's because there were no restaurants, because the only cooks that there were for the royalty. And now that the middle class and the common people could afford this food, the cooks, the ex-royal chefs, decided to capitalize on this and open up their own places and serve food. Now, at first, they just served one or two meals to everybody, but then the first place to actually serve a menu of listed items and serve people at smaller tables so they felt more special was a place called Grand Taverne de Londres. Now, this was opened by a chef by the name of Bouvilliers in 1782 and was the first actual restaurant that we know today. This completely changed the modern food industry, and now that's why we can eat at restaurants and sit down at a table and order from a menu. So, alas, the modern restaurant was born. Now, let's recap and see how it all happened. See, the restaurant took a long time to become what it is today. It started in ancient Rome and progressed further from street vendors and public cooks that was the only place you could go out and buy your own food. And then it went to France with shops that served soups called restaurants, meant to restore or restaurer the strength of a person. And then with the French Revolution, that's where we got the modern food service from. See, a lot could have happened in the many centuries and even millennia it took to create the first restaurant. A lot could have happened that would have made it different. Think about not eating at restaurants today. It's hard to think about. But without the French Revolution, we might not be doing that. Ultimately, we have to thank the French for realizing the tyranny of the ruler, overthrowing them, and then the creation of the restaurant was born. And now we can say, now we have our cake.